All right, back at it, man. We talking about how today there's a lot of misconceptions in tech sales about how to make 300K. The purpose of this video is to say, one, first and foremost, it's definitely possible, but there's a lot of misinformation, dare I say fake news, about the right way to get there, what it's going to require. And yeah, Chris, I'll hand it over to you. Obviously, we know the traditional path is start as an SDR and get to enterprise AE. We're going to go way deeper than just that today and talk about the things you should look for in a company and yourself, how to position yourself to actually be in the right place at the right time to make 300K plus. But Chris, what's on your mind?
Yeah. No, I'm seeing this a lot. Like I'm seeing folks, talk about how like they almost portray their OTE as the salary that they're making. And then when you dig a little bit deeper, I'm not saying like anybody who says that they're making 250K OTE, that they're not making that. But I think the majority of the time, especially for somebody who isn't necessarily in tech sales, they see that and they think, oh, like if I get offered an OTE of, let's say 90K as an SDR, right? Or maybe even like 100K. Like I've actually seen quite a few of these instances before where like, when you're breaking in, you don't know too much about the industry. You don't know what to look for. You don't know like what's important. You don't know how to vet a company. But then they think that 100K OT or however much it is going to be what they're actually making. And they get on the other side of it all and they realize that like, these targets that they have in place to even hit that OT, nobody's hitting it. There's like 15% quota attainment. Like everybody hits their lives. And honestly, like this is the number one reason why I see people quitting. And so I think like there's so much value to be found in understanding like what to look for. I mean, for me, like, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this too, but for me at least, like whenever I'm evaluating a company, I want to make sure that like one, obviously like the OT is good. Like at a baseline, is it a salary that I can align with? That's like the first step. But then from there, I try to figure out like, okay, the salary is good, but is it even realistic for me to hit this OT? Yeah. Right? So like obviously there's tools like RepView, there's other tools out there that you can use. I still believe in like the old fashioned method, reaching out to reps at the company, seeing like what they think. I mean, you taught me this actually, which was reaching out to not just like current people at the company, but also former people, right? Try to get that holistic overview of like what actually is going on at this company. Yeah. So, and you can even use this as like a guiding framework. Like instead of waiting until you get like an offer in hand and then saying, okay, like now let me figure out whether this is a company that I want to spend time on, right?
Yeah.
So like you can almost like use this sort of framework to make sure that like the companies that you're putting your time and effort into are companies that you actually want to work at, where there's actually longevity, where there's growth, different things. But yeah, I'll throw it over to you. I'm curious, what's been your experiences going through this? I'm sure you've had some of your own past stories when it comes to. And I know that people have reached out to you, with offers in the past. Like, how do you look at a company and say like, hey, this is
definitely. I guess there's a few ways to break it down. I think first of all, like if you're just breaking in, I still think there's a lot of value if you can get an offer at a great company to go there. Like regardless of the OTE, that's the best hedge on your career is to start there. But then there's this weird like middle ground in your career where if you did well as an SDR, especially at a big logo, or you promote very quickly, or you win President's Club, some, like lower quality companies as a whole, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but like if you've been in tech sales for like a year and someone's offering you like an enterprise AE role or a 300K OTE, like they're specifically trying to go after people like you that may or may not pan out, because they know they're not going to poach someone with 5+ years of experience that has been around the block, has maybe tried a very early startup in the past and failed. So that's one element of it. And then when it comes to, all the points you mentioned in terms of evaluating the company are spot on, and we can definitely dive into that more. I also think it's important for people watching to understand kind of like the stage and life cycle of a business. Because yes, for instance, at AWS or at Oracle or at Google, I'm sure they have people making 300K plus routinely and maybe the occasional $1 million earner. However, there's a lot of upside and missed opportunity where, especially in kind of like the mid-size world, where you've got a very popular unicorn, or you've got a company that like owns a considerable niche, where I would say kind of my company right now is a market leader in a pretty niche spot of the market, and they do very well because of that. there's a lot of hidden gems that on the surface look like bad logos, but may actually set you up not only to make 300K or more in a year, but also if you do well, you can ride the wave and get a director, a genuine director, as an example, title or VP title way earlier than you would have had you slogged it out at Google for 15 years. And all respect to that, that's still a great career path. So I think there's, a lot in there that we can unpack. I don't know. Is there one path? Or,
I think maybe just maybe we break it down for people because there's a lot of different. It also depends on what you're optimizing for, right?
Right.
Like you can optimize for my example was just compensation, but honestly, there's also upward mobility, like growth, which arguably is more important when you're first getting started, right? Like say you're looking to go into an SDR role. I honestly made the mistake. I started out by optimizing for just comp. And I think people just kind of get lost in the sauce here. They forget that the real money is made once you become an AE. So you want to become an AE as quickly as possible. Nobody cares if you're making 110 as an SDR, right? Maybe that's wrong to say that nobody cares. It's great, but I think make sure that the growth aspect is there.
Yeah, the growth's more important.
Right, exactly. Yeah. You make 75K as an SDR, maybe even 65, but you get promoted to AE. Now you're making 140. And all of a sudden now you're on the right trajectory. Yeah. Right. But yeah, I think let's break it down. Maybe we start with timing.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a big one. But well, actually, let me just go deeper than that. Let's say that we're optimizing for growth. What do you look for in a company or upward mobility?
Upward mobility. Yeah, I would say generally. Still, my stance is if you're breaking in, try and get an SDR at the best logo you can. Doesn't mean if you don't, you're set up to fail. I came in at a mid-sized, high-growth startup, and that's exactly where I wanted to be because I hated working as an engineer at a super large behemoth company. But I still think that's the best move. Then in the mid-market is where it gets interesting because you may have an opportunity as a mid-market. Let me put it this way. Let's say you do break into a big company. You spend 2 or 3 years there getting really good. In a strange way, you may actually kind of lose the skill set and the hunger to then go to a small hyper growth type of company.
Yeah.
And sure, people can make the adjustment, but I've seen people come in from market leaders and just be on a totally different wavelength than everybody else here at this 500 person company that's, ready to pillage, and and just do whatever it takes to get it done. Right.
Yeah.
But then I also think, if you do come in at an early growth startup as an SDR, I think there's a lot of opportunity and there's more onus on you as the individual to keep your foot on the gas for that promotion to account executive. And I think that worked really well in my favor. There was a lot up in the air. I joined a company that was growing very quickly, launched a new major product, and I was the first person to figure out how to sell that. But just because I did that wasn't enough. I had to, and there was opportunity to really push hard to get promotions because there wasn't really as much of a formal structure in place. Right. So there's always those trade-offs. If you're at a bigger company, you're going to need 18 to 24 months to actually promote. Whereas if you come in and you hit 200% of your number as an SMBAE, not only are you pulling 190 to 220 on probably 120K to 150K OTE, but now you can really ramp up that way. So hopefully, again, maybe I can give you a more specific answer, but just kind of laying out those dynamics of how to think about it. But yeah, I would say, in short, if you break into a big company, buckle up for 7 years if you want to ride that specific company to actually get to enterprise. But if you're going to make the move, there's always a reason not to. And if you get past 3 to 4 years at a behemoth, you're going to really lose the edge. And when you go to a small 500 to 2,000 person company that's fighting and clawing in unicorn status and has to grow for their next fundraising round, you're going to get a little caught off guard and have quite a wake-up call. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think we're fortunate today to have a lot of tools at our disposal. So I mentioned RepView, super valuable resource. It'll give you not necessarily the source of truth, but it'll give you an indicator. And there's even sample sizes, or sample sizes. I mean, there's reviews on there.
Yeah.
So you can look at how many people have actually reviewed this company. For me, a leading indicator is one, how many folks have actually put in a review for the specific role that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So let's say that I was looking to break in. Well, I would probably be targeting a sales development representative role. So even if it has 40 to 50 reviews on there, I would look at the specific role and see are there enough people that are reviewing this role for the SDR segment. And then from there I would make an assumption, and then from there I would go in and ask people, right? But I think that is probably the most important thing, because I've seen this happen at both big companies and small companies where they get stuck.
Yeah.
Right. So like you might come into a big company with the assumption that there's going to be a very clear defined path. And like that isn't always the case for people. So I think that's where it's like increasingly important. I would say statistically it is true. Like it's more true on those bigger fronts or on the bigger companies that they have a more set in stone path and different things there. But you can't just make that assumption and then say, oh, it's a big company, therefore, I'm going to promote it as long as I put my head down for 12, 18 months.
Yeah.
Like it's increasingly important, especially if you're like early in your career, if you're looking at like getting into this to set yourself up for success. Like your leading proxy, at least from my perspective, is like get to AE as quickly as possible. The comp doesn't matter. You're not going to make like a godly amount of money as an SDR no matter what. And honestly, if somebody is trying to bait you with like a huge salary, it's almost like, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's a red flag, but it kind of is a little bit.
Yeah.
Because like why, right? Like, don't you want those people to move into an AE role?
Yeah.
So typically when I see companies like really fishing for SDR talent, paying that much money for it, it's typically because they want to keep them there for a long time.
Yeah.
So,
and I would say, just reiterating too, like the way to actually make 300K is not necessarily to have a 300K OTE.
Right. Yeah, that's
like,
a good point.
Let's just say that explicitly. And I think too, it's like maybe for someone right now that's watching, that's like midway through their career or just promoted to AE, I just want to emphasize what's going to happen, because I've been through this very extensively. There's a lot of common things you'll see where a startup dangles, like for instance, you're perfectly happy at your mid-size company or this, market leader, and you're doing great and you're hitting 130% of your number. You're going to make 180K this year and it sounds great. And then out of nowhere, someone hits you with a 260K OTE offer. They want you to be their boots on the ground, first account executive for a company that's crushing it with $1 billion valuation, but their whole market is in India, and now you're bringing in their first North American sales team, or another hub like Israel or Europe or wherever it might be, and you're going to be the first person. That's like level one bait and switch that absolutely not on so many levels. Then two, I think what you'll see is you'll see these questionable companies. For instance, like if you're, let me put it this way, if you're doing really well as an account executive and you have sold databases as an example, or you sold something highly technical, the next phase of this that I would highly, highly discourage you away from is someone from an industry you've never heard of is going to ask you to sell a SaaS product that is fundamentally completely different than everything you've ever done.
Right.
And what will happen is you might see reviews, or you might see people who have been there for 3 or 4 years, and you start giving yourself all these false positive signals and trying to justify, well, hey, I know it's a different industry, but it's 260. Like, come on. Like, that's, it's amazing. And you don't do your diligence, and then next thing you know, you've completely changed industries. And maybe the flip happens where, let's say you're at like a HubSpot, I don't know, and then you go and try and sell like DevOps technology to engineers that are like building mobile applications as opposed to marketing managers, and now you're completely a fish out of water, and you've got maybe 6 to 12 months to even survive, let alone get another opportunity. So hopefully that sheds light on the process. And I think aside from, I know we'll definitely dive into how to actually make it, some of the positives to look for, but I think that's the biggest thing I see. And I mean, how many times have we had to walk people off the ledge in our community to, that are killing it as an SDR, and they're getting a double their salary offer as a founding AE, and they don't fundamentally understand. It's like, the reason, one, congratulations on your success. Like, especially now with the market, the fact that you're exceeding your quota consistently is a blessing. And you just don't know what it's like to be at a company where no one is hitting and everyone is struggling. But two, on top of that, like, the reason that you're getting reached out to right now, given you only have 7 months of SDR experience to be an AE, is because this company has no other options. And they're looking for that number one SDR that's impatient, that feels the pressure to make the jump. And the same exact thing with account executive. Like, people that have been around the block are smart enough to know that companies like Oracle or AWS or MongoDB have pretty set in stone promotion paths. And if they know it takes 18 months to go from SMB to mid-market, you better believe they are destroying the inboxes of all the AEs they can find that have 10 months of experience, that have another 8 to 9 months to go, that are still doing really well, but now for the first time have seen an OTE over 200K in their inbox. So I'll pause there. I know that was a lot, but I think it's really worth diving into, like warning signs of false positives, that are not realistic and do not set you up for success. So
yeah,
I digress.
No. I think you brought up a good point too, in the sense that like, honestly, like confirmation bias is real.
Yeah.
Right. Like you'll get an offer and you'll find every single. I mean, I'm guilty of this too. Like you'll try to find every single reason as to why you will be hitting this.
Yeah.
Instead of like asking yourself like, why wouldn't I be hitting this, right? And so I think that's very real. And I think honestly, like maybe even flipping the script a little bit in the sense that like, what should you optimize for? You know, I would say typically like the top companies with like the best comp plans and everything else, they typically know that their reps are like over attaining. And there's also like a mental aspect to that. Like if you end up going with a company where you might have a 260K OT and you can tell your family and your friends that now you're making 260, which you're not making 260, right? But you think that you will. But then on the flip side of it all, like once you accept that offer and you're not hitting your number, I mean, that's typically when I see people quit or like, you know, switch their careers entirely. So like it can even be like, it can really destroy your confidence so much in the sense that you almost just quit the industry altogether.
100%.
And it's not like your fault, right? Like you can be, I've seen the best salespeople like at a specific company, like crushing it, absolutely crushing it, actually good at what they do. And they'll move over, like they'll take an offer like this because they think, oh yeah, like they'll even do the math, right? It's like, oh, you know, even my base pay is going to be almost my OTE, which like is true. Like on paper, you're making that much money, but like the mental trade-off is what they don't account for. Because now they're no longer 140% on paper to their number and feeling like a rock star and crushing every single little thing, getting all the attention. Now they're 18% to their number. You know, once the quarter finishes, like nobody's hitting, everybody's bitching, everybody's complaining. Like they don't want to look like an idiot. They have to stick it out. I mean, there's so much to this, right? Yeah. But I really think like, or like instead of me saying that, like, what do you look for when it comes to evaluating those different types of companies, right? Like obviously like quota attainment is one thing, but even from like a trajectory standpoint, like what do you look for? Say that there is a company with like who's smaller, you've got a bigger company, but like let's say that the small company is well positioned. What do you look for to validate that opportunity? To say this is actually like worth my time.
I'm looking for a few things. One, the logos that they work with, but not just the logos, the actual case studies or, you know, videos on YouTube or webinars where if they say that AWS is a customer of theirs, they have a quote from an actual person there that still works there, right? And really doing that due diligence to try and understand if it's legit or not, because there's a lot of people that, you know, one way, shape or form, they like, especially in the open source world, open source technologies are used basically at every company ever. Whether it's actually like paid and supported is a whole different thing. But sure, we could technically say, you know, all of these Fortune 100 companies use this open source tool. But if they're not paying for it, that affects you as a salesperson, right? So I think, you know, initial kind of backing up too, it's like obviously RepView and Glassdoor. If it's not there on one or both, very, very big room for concern. I think one thing I learned the hard way earlier in my career as well is if anyone in your position specifically, not just the company, don't look at the SDRs, don't look at the AEs, look at like if you're being offered like a 250 or 350K enterprise AE job, how long has the longest enterprise AE been there? Because if it's anything less than 2 years, to be honest with you, I'm out. And I learned that the hard way. So I really think it's important to, I would lead with tenure. If those two, like the RepView, Glassdoor, and then the tenure thing are okay, one, I'm going to start sending out messages to a few people and say, hey, I've been offered to interview. I'd love to pick your brain for 5 minutes on your experience there. And then two, like I said, now I'm going to dive into case studies. I'm going to try and look, even as an example on like YouTube, right? Like try and find some videos about the product and really with the case studies, why is it so effective? Like, did it make them 10% more efficient? Or is, you know, a global director at Amazon saying, hey, this was a $10 million problem that this tool was uniquely positioned to solve, right? Because it's easy to get caught up in even a success story, but like, can you get a sense for why this is truly, truly different or way, way better than other products? So those are some of the first level questions I'm going to ask. And it doesn't include what I'm sure we could speak to on the interview process itself and the types of things I want to extract from that interaction. But I'll pause there. So.
No, 100%. I mean, I think even just like the way that, I mean, even to dive into the interview part of it all, like even the way that they answer questions, like are they actually like attacking the question head on or are they like dancing around certain things, certain elements, right? But I think like even I mean, it also depends. I think one thing that people don't ask during the interview process is like, why is this spot open?
Yeah.
Like, is it a backfill? Am I like filling in for somebody who was like 10% to my number? Because that's another element, right? You can be at a company where everybody's crushing it, but there's one horrible territory.
Yeah.
Like that's very
Tola,
real as well.
by the way.
Yeah.
If you're not aware, it's Tola for
Yeah.
everyone watching, which is Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas. They want you to be the founding rep in the Tola region. I'm looking right at you. That's that territory.
No, exactly.
But continue.
No,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's what I'm
So-
saying too, is like, you know,
Yeah.
everything can look perfect on a piece of paper, right? Like you can do all this research and do all your due diligence, but also the way that they just like answer these questions, right?
Yeah.
Like they're typically not going to give you a straightforward answer. You're gonna like find this, and you're gonna feel it, right? Like whenever you ask a question like that, it actually, like, a lot of people think like, oh, I shouldn't ask that because I'll look bad.
Yeah.
But it actually does the opposite. Like if this is actually a good company, a good opportunity, when you ask that question, it just shows them that like you're a killer. You know what you're doing. You know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And if they actually are a good company, they're gonna say he asked the right questions or she asked the right questions.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if you don't ask those questions, you might end up in a position where, like, probably even worse, right? Because everybody around you is crushing it,
Yeah.
and you're like the one person that's like hitting 25%. I mean, that happened at HashiCorp, my past company, not to me, but to other people. Like, I would see like a lot of other folks crushing it when the market was hot, and then there was just like one or two territories with reps that were very, very much so capable. Like even reps that I'm very close with today, and they actually ended up going to another company where they're like 800-900% to their number.
Yeah.
But they were set up for failure.
Yeah.
Right. And so everything can look good, and I think it just comes down to like critical thinking, due diligence, right? Like it's not wrong to ask questions head on.
Yeah. Well, and I think I could add to that too, because I think hitting on the psychology of the interview itself, like if you've never been in the 200s in terms of OTE, and the first time you hear that, it's like, holy shit, like
Yeah.
play cool, dude. They have no idea I'm making 160 right now. Just like keep it together.
Yeah.
Don't act like a loser. But to your point, it's like, yeah, if you actually vet that out in extreme detail, asking about the territory, why it's being replaced, you know, obviously, I think as you get to higher and higher levels, the cookie cutter questions of like, what is the average rep attainment kind of are off-putting.
Yeah.
But you can ask that and just creatively bundle that up. So like, hey, how's the team doing this last year? Why does it make sense to hire someone now, right? Who was in this position previously, like at a high level, like why did that position become available, right?
Yeah.
All these different things. And I think, yeah, to your point, it's like when you're very emotional and this is the first time you're interviewing for a type of role that you could make 300K plus at, outside of the unicorn mid-market rep that like blows it out of the water because they had, you know, they sold to Zoom or something, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, I think you get really emotional. And aside from asking those questions, I think you get caught up in, and it's not just like getting one answer too. Like, and I know I'm saying the same thing you said in a different way, but I just want to highlight this experience for people. It's like you'll finally get the confidence to ask that question, and you'll get a first level response or answer that's mediocre at best, and you don't follow up at all.
Yeah.
Right. And there's definitely a line. You don't want to be disrespectful, but really diving back into that and, you know, really shows them like, wow, this person, like showing them that you're not ready at the drop of a hat to take their offer is very, very powerful when done the right way. So,
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think maybe that's the upward mobility, the growth segment. Now, maybe let's flip it over to like compensation.
Yeah.
Right. Like, how do we optimize for compensation? Like, how do we look at these companies and say, all right, like if your goal is truly to just make a lot of money, maybe you're already an AE, right? Like it actually blows my mind like how many AEs there are out there who just were right place, right time, and now they're looking at making a move like this and they just don't have that sort of knowledge, that sort of insight. But how would you go about that? Like if we're just optimizing solely for compensation?
Yeah, well, I think it's you know, I would say generally speaking, with little exception, your OTE is gonna have to be around 200 plus to even have a chance.
Yeah.
You know, and generally from there, it's like I think about it more in terms of territory as opposed to specific number. I think you always want to negotiate in any type of offer that you get, but if the territory is like historically setting you up to fail, it's really not going to matter at that point. And sure, you may have to prove yourself. But one other element of this as well, I think in the same way that, you know, we always encourage people that are breaking in to not worry about the dollars up front. If this is your first true enterprise role and you have a 275 or 300K OTE, realistically, you're probably not going to hit it in year one.
Yeah.
Like you're going to start to ramp, and, you know, the back half of the year, you might make, you know, 150 across that time span, but the first half, is going to be very, very difficult, even if they, have a non-recoverable draw the first quarter and they pay you your full salary. So that's one thing. And then I think too, it's like, maybe again, I know I'm not answering your question, but this is how I think about it more. And I'm definitely open to feedback from you and comments below. But it's like, I think about it in terms of like, if I prove myself in this role, what is next from here?
Right.
And so, I think if it's like a 2 to 3 year timeline, that's about right of any potential move. But like, what would that do? Like, even if you're in a non-ideal territory and maybe you're in a bad situation right now and you're just going to take that offer because, like, if you come in and you do develop the Tola territory from scratch, what are you going to get out of that? And so I think that way you can at least hedge your bet. If they don't really have a good answer to that in terms of progression, it probably means they're churning and burning on this enterprise spot, and they're like, yeah, we'll think about it if you actually somehow figure this out, but like, we don't really care otherwise. So I don't know. What do you thought? I know I didn't answer your question.
No. And I think the reason why it didn't answer it directly is because there isn't like a perfect solution to it. I think it also changes like rapidly depending on where you're at as a seller. Yeah. Like, when you're first breaking in, upward mobility. When you first become an AE, still upward mobility. Like, you want to get to enterprise, right? Yeah. Like, I think you shouldn't really start thinking about compensation too much until you're at the enterprise level, because so long as there is upward mobility, right? Like, once you get to enterprise, once you have some tenure there, then you can start thinking about putting yourself in a position where, like, yes, the OT is there, 300K, something like that. And then you're looking at all these other factors, right? Like, even something else, once you get to that position, something that my old sales director taught me. He's now RVP over at my last company. Like, he's been a strategic seller for a very, very long time. I'm sure you can relate to this too. But, when he walks into a company, it typically has like 2 or 3 different accounts. And so he wants to know, like, what's the history? Yeah. Like, how has that gone down? Yeah. Like what's been the strategy around that? Like, what sort of support is there from marketing? How long has this territory been around? Like, you started to touch on it a little bit, but even like accounts, right? So, and I don't want to go too deep there because that's such a deep subject, but I think like it just changes. But I think until you get to enterprise strategic, I think just focus on upward mobility. Put yourself in a spot where the market is growing, right? Like, you have an opportunity to succeed. And you'll also see this at a lot of companies. Like, if you're at an earlier company in terms of their growth stage, like maybe they have figured out like the commercial, the velocity, the mid-market segment, but they don't have that upmarket motion yet. Yeah, that's right. A huge one. Like that happens a lot. And so, you might go, and again, it's like everything looks perfect on paper. The rep you score is amazing, right? But they don't have an upmarket motion. Yeah. So like, you really have to sit down and just do your due diligence and understand what you're getting yourself into. Yeah. And there are proxies to look at for these things, right? Like, if you're getting into a company for the first time, you're starting a whole new segment, right? Like, what is the broader go-to-market strategy? How are they planning on penetrating it? Like, what customers do they have right now who, are actually moving into those tiers? Like, what interest is there? Does this even fit into an enterprise, product stack? Yeah. Or is this literally just like a cost-efficient solution for SMB, smaller companies, right? Yeah. So I think there's a lot of layers to it.
Yeah, and I think a big one right now too, I mean, it's pretty early 2024 right now. Like, I think for the next 2 to 3 years, generally speaking, at the enterprise level, you're going to need to work for a market leader. Yeah. But then I think we'll see a phase on the back half of the 2020s where, whether it's AI, disruptive startups, those are going to be the hot places to kind of come in at that mid-market and maybe enterprise level. Maybe. But I think those are going to be the hot startups to ride. Like, if I were to try and make 300K within the first 3 years of my career, I'd try and be a corporate AE at a really fast growing startup. But if I wanted to consistently have a shot at W2ing 300K for a continuous period of time, especially right now, for say the next 5 years, I think the best thing you could do is go to a mid to a large size company and be an enterprise AE at a company that has at least 2 to 3 products minimum. So even if they have a $500,000 contract with an enterprise company right now, they have 2 to 10 different tools they could also, in theory, upsell another 100 to 500,000 each of throughout the life cycle of that customer's entire journey. So I think that's a big one right now in the enterprise space, especially as people are consolidating. I think, again, the script will flip here very shortly with all the AI tools and companies that are going to come out and disrupt things massively. Yeah. But we're not there yet. We're at the very early stages. And yeah, I'm curious to see how those companies pan out in terms of how they're going to try and poach people from top companies. Yeah. to come sell for a 50 person, open AI equivalent or something like that. So
no, and I think too, like, even like we were talking about this a little bit initially, but timing, right? Like when you're doing these things, when you're going for a high growth startup also matters a lot.
Yeah.
So like, like we're in a downturn right now. Obviously things are looking better. The S&P is improving, and even like crypto is blowing up. Like that's usually a pretty good proxy that something is happening. Obviously there's a bunch of other things there, but I think like you probably want to be in a position where you can just stick around. I mean, that's been the name of the game for like the last 12, 18 months.
Yeah.
Is like just the fact that like you can stick at a place, because a lot of the times, like, you can't really control, like you can be crushing it, but maybe they just literally made the executive decision to get rid of that entire territory.
Yeah.
Right. So like even when you're looking at going into these hyper growth companies, like that's a huge factor as well. So like maybe break it down, because you have a lot of experience here. You've been through this cycle. I mean, I just got into the corporate side of tech sales like 2 years ago. But I know you've been through this. So you've experienced it when it was booming. Now you're experiencing a whole other side of it.
Yeah.
Like what would you look for now versus what would you look for maybe like a couple of years ago?
Well, I think the thing to keep in mind too is like there's always going to be opportunities. So either of these could be true, but they're going to be more true pending, obviously like we talked about. But the reason I say that is one thing to keep in mind, where maybe you're a corporate AE or like an enterprise one, which is typically like 220 to 240 OTE. And sure, maybe you hit 350 1 year. The challenge with that non-truly enterprise strategic tier is that if you're doing well, a lot of people are. They are hiring more and more reps. And to your point, that territory is more likely to change on a yearly basis than the enterprise segment.
Right.
And so to answer your question, in a perfect world, like right now, I would definitely go the enterprise segment at a well-trusted company. And the challenge there is it is a higher barrier to entry, typically speaking. If you're at a large public tech company and they want enterprise reps, we're talking 5 years of experience to have a conversation. And then from there, it can be, there's a lot of competition on the market right now and all of these different things. But the reason I say that, especially at the enterprise and strategic level, it takes so long to close a deal there that if you are particularly good at running those motions within that company, no one's going to touch your stuff, to say it politely. Like there's no way if you grew, MasterCard or AWS, like if you doubled their spend in 2 years, you bet your ass you are keeping that account as long as you want it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's nobody touching that whatsoever. And they may even say, hey, we know we gave you 10 accounts last year, but we want you to keep AWS and only 2 other accounts. And the only reason we're doing that is because we have an extremely high degree of confidence that they're going to increase their spend drastically, and we know you're the person. So I think, again, that's kind of getting pretty niche into a spot that you've really got to work your ass off for and prove for many years out. Usually one company to get to that position, but that's the ideal, especially now with the market, because you have the ability to grow and strengthen relationships, because any startup is a risk right now for the biggest companies in the world. But on the flip side, again, if you're not there, and what benefited me tremendously was having 2 blowout years in kind of that mid corporate, low enterprise level sales, to then very rapidly progress to even have a chance to get in this position now at a public market leading tech company. So hopefully that answers your question, kind of sheds light on some of the differences. But
No, that's solid. Yeah, and this is a spicy one here. So I'm curious how you tackle this. But sometimes seeing even at my company right now is like we don't have that upmarket motion, but we're very, very strong. Like SMB, velocity, mid-market, like really, really good. I'm seeing a lot of reps like not wanting to move up. It's like there's so much growth happening at the company that reps don't want to move up. Yeah. It's kind of interesting, right?
No, that's fair.
But and I was going to ask you as well, like, and I think this is a pretty interesting topic for a lot of folks out there. Like, when does it make sense to actually go backward? Like, say you are enterprise, right? Like, and you want to, like, maybe there's a solid company killing it. Like, would you go backward, go into a mid-market segment? We're still optimizing for compensation. Yeah. Right? Like, what, like, and I know this is a spicy one. I even have to think about this one. But how would you look at that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's hard to say. But yeah, let's say I've got a questionable, 300K OTE offer versus like a 210, 220 range corporate. That's probably the scenario, to be honest with you. Like, would I ever see a situation where I'm W2ing 300K consistently in my current role and then be lured in for like a lower corporate level role, even if it was like 230, 250? Probably not, unless it's like the hottest company in the world, you know, and there's so many signals to confirm that. But there's also the flip side too, is like usually if you're the last person to find out, like you're too late, right? So I don't know. I would say it's like only if I found myself in an enterprise position that wasn't what I thought, that maybe I'm seeing a little bit of traction, but it's taking a year and a half to even get anywhere. In that case, I might consider that. That would really be about the only scenario.
Yeah.
So
and the reason why I asked it too is because like I think it's such a niche situation.
Yeah.
But again, going back to confirmation bias, like people, you know, will see, and I think that is the more realistic situation, right? Like you would never really consider something else unless there's such a big disparity between the two. I think logically people can probably. And this obviously changes as you get further down the road in your career. Like obviously the jump from SDR to AE is so significant. Like you wouldn't consider going back to SDR, right? But like as you move into commercial, as you move into mid-market, enterprise, those different things, like typically it's very easy to say if it's just 20K, this is obviously the better company to go for. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And maybe I shouldn't jump the gun there. It's not always easy. That's why we're having this conversation too. But I think also another thing to maybe talk about here is something very actionable. Like, what do you think are red flags? Maybe say you're stuck in this position. Maybe you joined a startup. Things were really good when you first joined. We're 12 months down the road. Things aren't good anymore. There's no upward mobility happening. That growth that you were promised is not there. You're not hitting your number. Other people aren't hitting their number. What do you look for? Like, and when, like when do you decide that like now is the time to go somewhere else?
Yeah, I think objectively as best as possible, you want to assess your efforts compared to your peers. And sure, there may be one peer that kind of, you know, got a huge deal, or, you know, whether it was genuinely them working the account, whether it was inbound and they kind of lucked into it, or, you know, there's all sorts of reasons that are outside the scope of this conversation. But I think that's, you know, there is, especially in the enterprise strategic level, it takes a while to get going. Like it really does. So I think if it's taken 12 months, but every quarter has been slightly up and you're starting to see bigger improvements over time, stick with it. But at the same time, if no one is hitting whatsoever, no one's even close, and you objectively are putting as much or more effort in, it's time to go. And I think that's the story when you're also looking externally is, hey, you know, ideally you have a solid track record at somewhere before. And you say, hey, you know, I really took a chance at this startup. It was not what I expected. I did really well the first half, and the company, you know, is not as well as positioned as I thought, or whatever. That's kind of the story. And then I would probably jump back to something safer, really cut my teeth there and learn, still earn at that point. You know, I'm sure you could get, pending the stage of your career, 200 plus OTE. But then I would go back and really say, okay, you know, if I was at a place for 12 months and it didn't work out, now the next place I find, I'm not going to force it, but I would like to find a place that within a reasonable doubt I could be at least for 3 to 5 years and keep building from there. So yeah.
No, I think that's solid. I think like there's a lot of stuff in this video. Maybe we just summarize it here as closing. I think like, and correct me if I'm wrong anywhere, but at least the way I look at it is focus on upward mobility. If you're at the earlier stage in your career, like your leading metric or what you are optimizing for should just be getting as far up the ladder on the AE ladder as possible, as quickly as possible. So I would really prioritize speed, upward mobility, growth beyond anything else. And I think ways to identify that is like, you don't even have to get on calls. Like I still think you should, but there's so many different tools. Like obviously one, rep view, look to see what the scores are there. If that's good, LinkedIn, check out the people, you know, are they seeing that upward mobility, right? Depending on whatever leap that you're looking to make. If you're looking to go SDR to AE, if you're looking to break in, look at the SDR or search for the AEs, look to see how many of them were actually SDRs, how many were promoted. You can kind of get to like a conclusion here. Everything adds up. Then you move on to like talking to people who were there previously, who are there now. In the same way, like, you know, if you're looking to go from commercial to mid-market to enterprise, right? And then once you get to that enterprise stage, that's when you should start thinking about, you know, compensation. Or unless like, obviously, like if you are commercial or mid-market and you get a really good enterprise thing, then obviously it's a valid discussion. But I think that's the main takeaway here. And, you know, use your critical thinking. Like things aren't always as they seem on paper. So really like when you're committing to a company, remember you can't just like go to that company, especially, I think you learn this the longer that you spend in tech sales and in corporate. You can't just be jumping around from company to company. Be ready to commit like 12 months.
Easily.
Like 12 months to a company, right? Without it looking really bad on your resume. And I'm not saying you're screwed if for whatever reason, like that doesn't happen, but you're gonna have to explain it, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so like do your due diligence. It's gonna save you so much time, energy, and even money, just by looking at some of these things. But yeah, I'll throw it over to you if you have anything else in closing.
Yeah, I think just, to all those points, it's like in an ideal world, if you get nothing else out of this conversation, ideally you can land at a company where you could see yourself for 2 on the low end to 5+ years, ideally. And, to your point, early on, you want to optimize for the company that has a solid growth trajectory, right? One that I have not worked at, but I've seen a lot, whether it's real or not, for you to decide. But like a MongoDB of the world has a very well-defined and rigid sales structure, such that if you're successful, while it may take, 18 months, I think, to go from SDR to AE, it's happening. And in a worst case scenario, if it doesn't and you are performing, you're going to have a lot of options to jump, to your point, to another company. But early on, I would highly recommend to try as best as you can to find a company that you can be at for a while. Because if you have 3 solid years at a Mongo, as an example, and you promoted twice, that is killer.
Yeah.
And you have set yourself up so incredibly well versus SDR to jumping to AE somewhere, to then after 12 months there, jumping to another AE spot. And now you spent 3 years there, but it's kind of like mid-quality, questionable performance at best. Are you really suited for enterprise? So that's kind of my thoughts there. I don't know. I mean, like I said, we could probably make this into 3-4 episodes, but I think we covered a lot. So I hope everybody gets a lot out of it.
No, this was solid pod.
Nice.